I thought this was a fabulous representation of how leadership operates. Take charge and teach us what is the iceberg principle. Situational leadership is something that we need to talk about, where you can teach someone, but like any other skill, you got to keep nurturing it, else you're going to lose it.
My experience being a leader in many different functions is that oftentimes issues or challenges are presented and our natural inclination is to try to solve them. And usually, because we have so many action items, we really try to solve them fairly quickly. And it turns out to be kind of a whack-a-mole type of thing, right? Where you're just going from one to the other. Especially if they're taking the time, an issue comes up, and then really spending time to work with all levels of the organization to understand more about that issue. What you'll see is it just continues to grow into a bigger principle. And the people closest to the issue are the ones that are going to tell you the most detail about it. You know, if you're in a multi-layered organization, by the time things reach to the top or report it out, there's been, depending upon the challenge, several different versions. I call them director's cuts. If you really want to solve it, go directly to the source. And usually the best ideas come from people closest to the issue. So it sounds simple, but it takes time. And it takes also organizational trust for people to open up to you and have those conversations, right? Those are the things that you can't learn from data, that you can't learn from a PowerPoint. And oftentimes that's how we look and try to solve things, is through data and PowerPoint. And, that's great. All the leaders out there, if it was just data-driven decision-making, we have a pretty short lifespan, because pretty soon AI will figure all that out if it's truly just data-driven. So that's my idea of the iceberg principle. Tackle some fairly large challenges, ability to manage our leader to dig in and start going down, and rather than knocking off the issue for a quarterly check mark.
What are some of the repercussions when leaders don't go?
I think it really shows up. The easiest way is if you do any sort of employee satisfaction scores or questionnaires. There's usually questions in there about the leadership. The notorious, depends on how people interpret that. Oftentimes you'll see that understand what they're doing or connected or care, and that's the data that will show you that you have a problem. Performance, obviously, organizations will underperform if you think about it, especially in our high-tech field. We're relying on people's creativeness to give us product, right? So we pay them and they give us intellectual IP. And if they're not giving us the quality of intellectual IP, you're wasting those resources, right? So, that's the product will suffer, and then the organization will suffer, then morale will suffer, you start getting in, and then you're hiring new people, which is very expensive because of the amount of time it takes to hire, train, ramp up, etc. So you kind of get into this cycle of never-ending catch-up.
Jack, what has your experience been?
So my personal experience has been varied. And usually in the organizations that I'm in, I've been very lucky with the leaders that I've had, where I've personally developed relationships, trusted relationships with my leaders, to where, and it takes time, but get to the point to where you can openly have that conversation. A favorite one is we opened a new office in a location to treat it as if it was the same as the US location. Very strict on, we had definite start times and finish times and all of that kind of stuff.
This is how the organization is going. There's 5 people talking in your ears, but to maintain that objectivity is really important. And to do that, you have the habit of digging.
Yeah, so the people on the phone that know me, everybody has their technique on how to get there. So everybody on the phone that knows me, I kind of steal an approach from an old 70s TV show called Columbo. And he was kind of this investigator dude that always kind of do that. I just don't understand. Could you tell me this one thing? So I'd usually pull the self-effacing, I'm not the smartest guy in the room, clearly, but I just don't understand why, and just confused. I'm not that bright. Can you explain this to me, why we're doing it this way?
I remember Columbo. I like that attitude. I think that's important to maintain that curiosity.
Let me tell you that, and we talked about this as a leader, a salesperson, your most important thing to do that you can do is open-ended question and listen. Just shut your mouth and listen to the customer, listen to people, and don't assume that you know everything. If you think you know everything, then talk.
How can a leader become a leader?
The way I would do it would be easier over Zoom rather than personal face-to-face. Break out your iPhone and start time. Say we have a 40-minute meeting. Every time you're talking and every time you're not, stop. And if you're over 30% of the time talking, probably not a good interaction with somebody. You really need to have them talking more, in my opinion. And then, if you're using pretty basic stuff, you got to use open-ended questions. If you're using closed-ended questions, you're not going to learn talking about, in my opinion. That's it. That's forcing it. That's a good way to force yourself to think that way. You just got to shift your mind.
How do you advise which situations are those where stakes are high enough, failure is not enough?
So I think I talked about this before. That's really, you have to assess the team, and that goes back to situational leadership. Making sure if it's failure really not enough, you need to be engaged, but you also need to make sure you have the right people in the right roles, and looking at situational leadership to make sure they either have the expectations are set properly, in my opinion. If people are familiar with situational leadership, I'm sure at some point, Suraj, it's something that you'll go through, or some of those concepts in a future podcast, or look it up online. It's there. It's a fairly simple model, but it's one that but because somebody has a lot of experience doesn't mean they're necessarily able to do it with minimal or no. I hate to say this, failure is always an option, right? It can be, you have to push things at times to stress the system, failure, in order to, I know that sounds bad, but, that's one of many outcomes. Sometimes you learn more and grow more as an organization through failure than not. Very few of us work at a startup where we're responsible for paychecks week to week, right, for our employees. So, we take some tasks where you know that it's going to be super challenging and where failure is possibly there, and organizations learn a lot from that.
To release the fear of failure, people can truly innovate. And I think we undermine that, and we dunk on people when they do fail, or we reprimand them and tell them, hey, didn't perform well. And there's a lot that's going on and misutilized right now in getting people out the teams and stuff like that. You can teach someone, but like any other skill, you got to keep nurturing it, else you're going to lose it.
Leaders need to nurture it or they lose it as well.